Why does John Candeto need to hear this clip from our friends Ted Merz and Meghaan Lurtz? I mean, we talked about so many things in this conversation. We talked about time and just the scarcity of time as an asset, how he's thinking about this stuff lately. We talked about spiky people. You're going to hear what John thinks of as spiky people, but it's a really useful way for thinking about who you want to partner with, who you want to invest in, who you want to think about in the world. Spiky people, keep that in mind. And last but not least, we talk about how truth is unconcealed in paintings and art museums and all sorts of places online and in our lives. John Candeto, man, did we have a time. Jack Forehand, let's roll some clips.
Story matters, meaning matters, and it's hardwired in.
I was a former journalist, and one of the things about journalism is what's left out of that story. It becomes oftentimes the experience gets very flattened, and you leave out all the edge cases and the sort of emotion or perspective that isn't all corroborated.
Snapshots of anything are neither good nor bad, but they're a moment. It doesn't contain truth, but it certainly doesn't mean it's the whole truth. It's a little piece of a much broader tapestry. When we hired spiky people, meaning people that were just phenomenal at a thing, that worked a lot better than hiring people who could sort of cover everything. Time is the scarcest asset. That's certainly the only asset you can't get more of.
What would happen if, in an effort to find a better way, maybe a perfect way, and either way, you combined a Berkshire, an Anne, and a Donnie? I think you'd get this guess. Now, who did I just say? Let me clarify it this way. Berkshire Hathaway, Anne Hathaway, Donnie Hathaway. So from Berkshire, I like that you're laughing, right? This is a good sign. So from Berkshire, you get, for starters, you get raisins and turds joke, and I'm always going to be here for that. But you also get the lesson of compounding over time, all the magic that intentional compounding builds. And from Anne, you'd take, we'll go all the way back to the Princess Diaries start, maybe even the TV show before that, but then the real royalty lessons that come from the devil and how she wore Prada. And despite the hardship of Rachel getting married, the point is there's range and that type of performative compounding story. Last but not least, I know you're here for this one, the sheer musicality of Donny Hathaway, possibly my favorite Hathaway on this list. And now, this Christmas, obviously, that's the big hit, but celebrating a mutual cultural milestone with your own contribution, that reflection, it counts so hard. It's like Buffett buying Apple, or maybe Anne doing Les Miserables. So Buffett and Donnie, they invested, they compounded. That's what this guest does best. Phronesis Fund founder, art of quality host, writer on the website that bears his name. I'm singing this song for you, sir. John Candeto, welcome back to Just Press Record.
Oh man, applause to that. You remain the king of the intros. That was amazing.
My small fiefdom. Now, you are going to guess by the end of this episode why I had to show you this clip from Ted Merz and Meghaan Lurtz. But first, before we do that, I mean, you and Matt Russell, we were hanging out a while back. What's new in the life of John Candeto these days?
Oh, what's new? I mean, it's always nerdy things, right? Like I've been down this rabbit hole on economy of time for a little while now. But the basic architecture of that is, if you think over the centuries of human history, what's been the scarcest asset? You started with sort of the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, right? It was safety and sustenance, and then you work your way up to sort of, capital assets, right? Really basic stuff, roads and castles. And then you get to homes and you keep going. And then kind of relatively recent in human history, we just kind of went bananas with financialization of everything. So we had a few hundred years of that. But ultimately, I think where this all goes is time is the scarcest asset. It's certainly the only asset you can't get more of. And so if that's true, then areas that have high economy of time ought to be areas where value accrues, sometimes somewhat quickly and potentially somewhat sustainably. And so the whole deal, but that's been the latest rabbit hole.
Now, you applying this directly, do you feel like there's application direct to your own life? Is it more just the philosophical underpinnings of this? That is a very broad topic, but very near to my heart too.
Yeah. Yes. Everywhere. I mean, in some sense, time is what life is made of, right? And so, if you want to do the deathbed looking backwards thing, I mean, you're going to remember a great deal about what you spent time on and what you didn't spend time on. And so there's the very practical, a lot of folks get to an older age and regret not having spent as much time with their kids. There's also just the business when you decompose most businesses. I mean, Buffett, this past weekend, he said, as he said many times, you get a handful of people in life that really move the needle for you, and you should really treasure them. And he said of his investments, about a dozen truly good decisions in 60 years were really what made the difference. So, if we're in that world, and I think we are provably in that world, then thinking hard about who are those people and what are those opportunities and so on. The Lenin line, there are decades where nothing happens and there are weeks where decades happen. I mean, that is, I think at the level of humanity, we're probably living through something like weeks where decades happen right now, through the kind of leverage we now have this sort of newish component within the last few decades of, call them robots, that can amplify a lot of things. And so you imagine, one shrewd decision getting amplified immensely through, automation can be a really big deal in any direction, good or bad. And so, one way to look at that is where you're getting high economy of time on things that matter. And you can say, you can ask questions of, is that a clue towards value creation? Is that a clue towards compounding of trust within relationships, something I focus a lot on, and so on. So widely applicable, I would say.
All right. Well, in the interest of making time interesting, if nothing else, I've got this clip that I really need to show you. So, and for the guests at home, this is part of what I do all the time on culturescreative.com on the website. I encourage people, go make a personal reflection on the thing you just paid attention to. Jack forehand, roll the clip, and then John Candeto's coming right back with me to break down how this makes him feel.
I was a former journalist, and one of the things about journalism is the reason they call different people to get quotes, comments, and reactions is to corroborate the story. Okay, Matt, you said this, and Meg, you said this, Jen said this, Sue said this. And so you publish the intersection of that. But what's left out of that story, it becomes, oftentimes the experience gets very flattened, and you leave out all the edge cases and the sort of emotion or perspective that isn't all corroborated. And I think one of the things people miss, they don't, like, journalism doesn't reach a lot of people because of that. It oftentimes doesn't have this emotional component because we can't corroborate everybody felt the same about the event. So we're not going to put that in. If that makes any sense. So then you have this whole rise of like first person narrative, autobiography or memoir. That is, I'm just going to tell you how, man, I teach you, but this is what I saw. Okay, this is what I see. Now, I think it goes back to your point about trying to assert your story in your life and the importance of that and having a cohesive narrative. Anyway, that was.
Oh yeah. Even look at how people curate their social media. It's no different. They post like the beautiful moment that was taken only moments before, like my older daughter dunked my younger daughter. That's just that it. Yeah. But nobody knows that next thing happened. But story matters, meaning matters, and it's hardwired in.
There's a famous photograph from the Vietnam War era of this airman coming home after he'd been in prison for several years. And his family's on the tarmac greeting him, and his kids are running at him, and his wife's there, and they're all crying. It's soldier comes home. It's incredibly powerful image. And then the real story is that right after that photo was taken, the wife told she was divorcing him and had met another person, and their whole family fell apart. It's like moments after the photograph, but people see that image, and that image it's a popular image of triumph or something, happiness.
Sure,
it's a snapshot. I think one of the things about story that's interesting and interesting, and this goes back to change in people's lives, is if you just take a snapshot, it's the difference between a photo and a movie. The photo gives you a limited perspective that it doesn't play out over time, right? It's a moment.
All right. So Ted Merz, Meghaan Lurtz. I think you know Ted. You just met Ted.
Yes.
Right?
Just met Ted. Wonderful to meet Ted. Yeah.
And Meghaan, have you come across Meghan's work? Do you know Meghan?
I have not. I mean, I did a little research before this, but no, I haven't had the pleasure of meeting her yet.
Let me just tell you, the conversation you and Meghan are going to have, hopefully in an email and somewhere else eventually, about the trans-theoretical model of change will possibly change your life in ways that has also impacted and changed mine. But let's dive. the main thing I got to ask you first. Ted makes this point with the journalist's background about corroborating the story and how that flattens the story. How the hell does your brain process that idea?
Yeah, I thought about spiky people, and let me explain that. So
Punk rock kids, the goth kids. What are we talking about?
Never quite spiked my hair, although I tried once. But no, I spent about a decade building a software business, and one of the things we learned, we hired a bunch of people, and one of the things we learned was, and I think this is broadly true a lot of places, when we hired people who sort of kind of ticked every box on everything, they ended up to not be very good performers. They'd be okay. But, imagine a software engineer that, just everybody loves and gets along well and, is capable enough at coding and can also help out with the business stuff and, and, right? And I'm not saying these people don't exist, but on average, what we learned is if you could find an engineer that just, you would marvel at their code. They may or may not be a lot of fun at the bar, and sometimes they were, but, what we found is we learned that when we hired spiky people, meaning people that were just phenomenal at a thing, that worked a lot better than hiring people who could sort of cover everything. And that's a point on focus. I think it's also a point on how the world works. So when Ted says, we make a lot of calls and try to corroborate what happened, one of the ways that comes off to me is, that's a perfectly valid approach to things. But it misses a lot of the spikiness, right? Sometimes things are Ted, when I saw him recently, he told me a story of Michael Bloomberg throwing phones at people, right? And that's the sort of thing where you could imagine if there was a reporter calling the 10 other people in the room and like, did Mike Bloomberg throw a phone? You can imagine like maybe it's hard to corroborate. I don't know, but that story stuck. Like that created an image and a moment in my mind in a way where if the reporter had corroborated everything, it was like, and Mike got a little angry, and that was the story. It's very different. So that was one impression I had.
Okay, inside of the spiky people thing, I'm specifically thinking, and I love this because I feel like I can make this reference and you know what I'm talking about. The Nassim Taleb idea about like you pick the surgeon who has the mustard stain on his shirt and does not have it together.
Yes.
Is that a version of a spike? Maybe if you can paraphrase it, otherwise I will. Paraphrase what he's trying to get across with that, and then is that a version of spiky?
Yeah, it's just a question. What are you after, right? And it's I think since there's always guitars over your shoulder, and there's some guitars on my wall over there, I'm always thinking, you and I know when we listen to someone play guitar, you don't even have to see what they look like, right? You can just appreciate the beauty of their craft and their capability purely through the sound they make. And there are all these interesting studies of orchestras that hire musicians with a curtain between the auditioner and the auditionee. And generally the summary is sort of you get to better quality of music if you don't even have to know what the person looks like, because you can just judge the thing that matters, the audio. And so I think it's that, the surgeon, you want them, you really don't care how good they look. You don't care what they look like at all. You're not even going to see them. You're going to be unconscious, right? You want them to be a phenomenal surgeon. And so the mustard stain is completely irrelevant. I think that is the point. And the more one corroborates, I think you get to a version of no great symphony was ever written by committee, and so that's, I understand there's a time and a place for this kind of epistemology, but it does miss something
inside of that idea. And I only ask this because you and Ted just ran into each other at the Berkshire meeting of all things. Do you think about Munger and Buffett together, similar way? Like they conducted a symphony. Can you make a story bigger than just the people at the heart of it?
Well, you can certainly try. Obviously context is enormously important, and it's been interesting. So Buffett just, closed the book on 60 years of 5.5 million % return.
I think he did.
And
okay.
He did all right.
He did okay.
But it's really interesting to watch. I just read an article where folks are trying to kind of basically, if you sort of, try to look at alpha versus beta and try to look at kind of average quality of decision versus total performance, and on and on and on. They just sort of do all the financial math on it. It's like, well, maybe it wasn't that good, and I think that's very foolish. And there's all sorts of epistemological ways you can poke at this. One way that people love to judge fund managers is kind of the average quality of their decision. And it is just the case, if you trade 100 times a day, you're going to throw off a lot of data exhaust. Then you can ask questions like, is there statistical significance in their buys and sells and all that? If you don't do a whole lot, which Buffett was of that vein, and I'm of that vein, a lot of people are of that vein. And by the way, every business builder who builds one really good business is of this vein too, right? It's a little foolish to say, okay, Zuckerberg built, I don't know, Meta once, but like, how good is he really? He only built one. It's just not the way the world works. It's people trying to, as Buffett would say, use the tools they have to try to sort of understand everything. And it's not how things work. That works for some things. It don't work for everybody.
Okay, now what about and Ted uses the example of the snapshot, and this is where probably Meghaan Lurtz's work would make even more useful for both of us. But what about in the case of the snapshot? Like the snapshot will always and can be used to tell a story, even if it's not the real story. How do you think about, I don't know, snapshots versus movies, I guess?
Yeah, I think of the Ian McGilchrist notion of truth being something that is unconcealed. And so snapshots of anything are neither good nor bad, but they are a moment. And, if you want to understand if someone's really an uncommonly mean person, you can't just pick a random point in their life when they were at a low point and then decide, you can say that's that's an example of a human at a low point. But anyone who's half thoughtful knows we've all been at low points. We've all said and done things we regretted. And so, it just needs to be appreciated in that way. The context is it's a snapshot. It doesn't mean it doesn't contain truth, but it certainly doesn't mean it's the whole truth. It's a little piece of a much broader tapestry, and you'd really you'd want to see the bigger tapestry before you make some serious judgments.
Pulling the thread on the tapestry, pardon the pun, but if I'm pulling the thread on the tapestry and I'm connecting it back to the idea that you were talking about at the beginning, like if time is scarce, how do we reconcile the scarcity of time across these two things of bothering to take the picture or make the movie or what that reveals about truth when we want to cobble these things together?
I mean, humility is the first word that comes to mind. Is there, we're in a world full of people, and this is kind of just human nature, that we don't like uncertainty. We don't like change. The Berkshire stock dropped a little bit because Buffett announced his retirement. Whether or not that drop is meaningful or enduring is a completely different question. But at the end of the day, there are a bunch of people who have been fans of Buffett for decades, and they don't like the fact that Buffett's human and he's getting old. And I understand that. I'd like him to be around another, 5 decades too. But, I think my point is, what we can know and what we do know are two different things. I think when you think really hard about it, we're full of far more hypotheses than we are certainties, or at least we ought to be. A hypothesis is Berkshire after Buffett will have meaningfully different returns. It'd be very hard to know that. I mean, Buffett spent 60 years building a thing that could outlast him, and he spent easily, very provably, the last couple decades focused really hard on this thing outlasting him. And so to know that Berkshire after Buffett is doomed is, I think, at a minimum, just a very arrogant thing to say. To hypothesize that is fine, but then you kind of got to go through, and get more snapshots, right? See more of the tapestry and see.
In the tapestry, I think we got lots of Berkshire Buffett covered. Favorite Anne Hathaway movies? Do we got any good ones in the catalog? Is that too on the spot? That's
Batman.
I had a Catwoman reference in the intro. I hit the cutting room floor, but yeah, she did a great Catwoman.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. What about Donny Hathaway? Are you a Donny fan?
I know, for no good reason other than I need to route some time that direction.
All right, I will route some of that time in your direction, and I think my secret gateway for you might be some of the live stuff. If you've ever been in. Hearing him in a room is a different experience.
Yeah.
than hearing the recordings. Now,
Yeah.
you're going to guess in a second why I had to show you this clip. But first, before we get to that, people want to find you online. They want to bug you on the internet. Where are you at these days?
Yeah. So johncandeto.com is the portal to everything else. And there's, I run the Phronesis Fund. So there's links to that. And all my partnership letters are in public. So, that's easy to get to. There's the Art of Quality podcast you mentioned, and there's links to that on the site. johncandeto.com, and then choose your own adventure.
Choose your own adventure for there. All right. Your best guess. I'll reveal what I thought in a second, but why do you think I wanted to show you this? Not just because you're at Berkshire together. I'm ruining that part for you. That's not the reason.
Yep.
Why did I want you to see this?
I'm gonna, and forgive I'm full of nerdy language today, but it seems like Ted and I think Meghaan as well think hard about epistemology, or how we know what we know. I mean, it's a reason you would make a comment like, the journalistic toolkit gets you here, but not everywhere. I just think it's so important for the age we're in. We're in an age of 20-second clips and snapshots. And for all the criticism of the 20-second clip, it's an interesting thing. You have to know that is a little way of knowing things. And there's a broad toolkit of things we can know. And the stats nerd that wants to go crazy on the hedge fund managers, that's cool. That's not useless knowledge, but it doesn't get you everywhere. And equally, the person who says, philosophy is the only thing to judge and the statisticians don't have anything to teach, that all of that is just, hubris. And swap it with humility, understand we got a much broader, toolkit to know what we can know, and then try to get a little wise on, what tools are appropriate for what things you're trying to know. I think that gets you somewhere.
The great part about this is I write down these answers before I talk to you. And then you answer with something like that. And I'm like, man, that's an even better answer. How can I said? But all right. So what I said was, don't just flatten stories, expand them, and expand the moments.
Yeah.
And
there
I think
you go.
the epistemological analysis that you just provided there, like that's the idea. Follow-up question to this. My wife and I were we were out in Chicago. We stopped by the big museum that I'm going to butcher the name of because every city has their variation on the museums. But we're looking at these pictures and I'm thinking to myself, kind of what you just said. Not that TikToks are going to be in a museum someday, but like short-term videos, these like little clips and whatever else in my brain. I'm like, this is still just a piece of shrapnel off of a broader story every single time. What differentiates that medium from the great works of the past? You have any way to reconcile these thoughts for me? You help guy out?
I think let's bring in some T.S. Eliot. So that the idea that the end of our journeys will be to, come back to where we started and know it for the first time. I spent years kind of kicking that line around in my head before I felt like I understood it. But let's take the Chicago Museum, right? So I think of that famous pointillist work, A Sunday Afternoon on the Isle of La Grande Jatte, which I've been blessed to see a number of times over the years.
Yeah.
And I remember having never seen it, just seeing a picture of it in the book, and then seeing it for the first time, it's always meaningfully different when you see it in the flesh. But then also I've seen it probably every 5 years for 20 years now, something like that. And I know it a little more every time I see it. And I mean, that's both one of the great joys in life, and also I think just how things work, right? I mean, I would like to think maybe the truth that's in that painting gets a little more unconcealed to me every time I see it. And I imagine I could go every 5 years for the rest of my life and there's still something in it. And I think that is just, much like relationships, that is just how it works. And so, snapshots are neither good nor bad, but they're snapshots. And, if your goal, if you orient yourself towards being a truth-seeking person, then, there's a lot of joy in continuing to seek truth.
Here's to the joy in seeking truth, John Candeto. Thanks so much for coming back on Just Press Record.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Like, comment, and hey, subscribe below. The Cultish Creative on YouTube if you haven't already. As the good compliance people want me to remind you, Matt Ziegler, that's me, is a managing director at Sunpoint Investments. The opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Sunpoint Investments. No information on this podcast should be construed as investment advice. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of clients of Sunpoint Investments. I hope you've been entertained. I hope you found this useful. I hope you talk to a professional before you try any of this stuff at home. And most of all, I hope you've subscribed. Be nice to each other out there. And don't forget, head over to cultuscreative.com and let's make curiosity a habit together. And I'm out.